When I reserved my stay at the Lakeview Hotel by Lake Serenity, my expectations were set on a quiet retreat from the non-stop pressures of my marketing job. The hotel, celebrated for its remote tranquility and picturesque lakeside views, promised a much-needed escape. The first impression of the hotel was breathtaking. An aura of old-world elegance with sprawling gardens that kissed the lake's edge. The receptionist's warm welcome was complemented by the key to my room, which she mentioned boasted one of the hotel's finest views of the lake. True to her words, the room was a haven of peace with tasteful decor and a sweeping view through a large bay window. The calm waters of the lake, framed by lush greenery, presented a living painting of calm skies and gentle nature. It was the perfect backdrop to unwind and rejuvenate. However, the peaceful ambience was soon disrupted by a knock at the door. Puzzled, since I hadn't requested any service, I opened the door to find the corridor empty. A folded note on the floor caught my eye, with my name neatly inscribed on the outside. Curiosity piqued, I picked it up and read the unexpected message that shifted the tone of my calm getaway. Meet me at the dock at midnight. There's something about the lake you need to see. The note, unsigned and cryptic, lodged itself in my thoughts, turning over and over as I tried to enjoy the day's tranquility. Who could have left it, and what did they want me to see? As evening painted the sky with strokes of orange and purple, my resolve solidified. I would go to the dock, compelled by a mix of intrigue and a subtle undercurrent of anxiety. Cloaked in a thick jacket against the chill of the lakeside night, I made my way to the appointed place as midnight drew near. The path to the dock was lit only by the moon, casting elongated shadows and making the gentle sounds of the lapping water seem eerily loud in the quiet night. Upon reaching the dock, a silhouette emerged against the moonlight reflected on the water. A man appearing older with weathered features that spoke of many years tending to these grounds. Claire. "Thank you for coming," he said in a deep, resonant voice. "I'm Jonathan, the caretaker here. There's something important you need to know about this place." He proceeded to unfold the history of the Lakeview Hotel, from its illustrious days hosting gala events to its darker times. His narrative took a turn as he recounted a series of mysterious disappearances many decades ago. Guests would wander down to the lake and simply never return, vanishing without a trace. Despite thorough investigations, no concrete explanations were ever uncovered, leaving a shroud of mystery enveloping the hotel. As the anniversaries of those disappearances approach, strange phenomena occur. Jonathan continued, his gaze fixed on the dark waters. Things move on their own. Guests report sightings of figures by the lake at night, and some hear whispers carried by the wind across the lake. The air grew colder as he spoke, and a shiver ran through me. Not from the night air, but from the gravity of his words. "Do you believe these events are connected to the disappearances?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a grave look in his eyes. "I've seen enough through the years to believe there's something unexplainable at play here. That's why I sent you that note. Tonight is another such anniversary, and I felt it prudent to warn you. Stay vigilant, Claire. The lake. It seems to have a peculiar pull." As we stood there, a sudden chill breeze swept over the dock, carrying a soft, almost sorrowful whisper that seemed to rise from the lake itself. Looking out over the glistening waters, now under the pale glow of the moon, I felt an inexplicable draw towards its hidden depths. Standing there by the lake, the whispering breeze sent ripples across the surface of the water. The feeling of unease settled deeper within me as Jonathan's stories about the lake's past gnawed at my mind. I couldn't help but be drawn in by the mystery, by the chance to uncover a story so deeply tucked away from public knowledge. I thanked Jonathan for his candor and made my way back to the hotel, my thoughts swirling with the eerie tales and the chilling encounter. Back in the safety of my room, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows seeming to dance in the corners. I decided I needed more information. The next morning, after a restless night filled with half-seen dreams and the echoing whispers, I headed to the local library in the nearest town. If there were any truth to the tales, Perhaps there would be records or old newspapers that mentioned the disappearances or anything unusual about the lake. The library was small, the kind where the librarian knows all the local lore and is eager to share it. Mrs. Weber, a kindly older woman with spectacles sliding down her nose, was more than willing to help when I mentioned my interest in the history of the Lakeview Hotel and its mystery. "Oh dear, you're staying there. You must be brave," she chuckled, pulling out stacks of old newspapers and a few dusty books from the back room. As I sifted through the yellowed pages, I found several articles on the disappearances. Each story was eerily similar. Visitors reported feeling drawn to the lake at night, with some never returning. No bodies were ever found, and no traces of foul play were evident. The articles mentioned the local legend of the lake being a mirror to another world, a gate that occasionally opened but never let anyone return. The notion sent a chill through me, even sitting in the sunlit quiet of the library. I gathered copies of the articles and thanked Mrs. Weber, who offered one last piece of advice with a worried frown: "Be careful around that lake. Some things are better left undisturbed." Returning to the hotel, I felt a mix of dread and determination. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the lake, I made my way to the dock once more. This time, I carried a camera, hoping to capture any anomalies. The water was calm, almost glassy, and the silence was profound, as if the natural world was holding its breath. As the sky darkened, the air grew inexplicably colder, and the water began to stir. A soft fog rolled over the surface, creeping towards the shore and enveloping me in its cold embrace. I raised my camera, my hands shaking slightly, and took a series of photos of the lake, the dock, and the surrounding area. Just as I was about to review the images, a sudden movement on the water caught my eye. It was subtle, a mere shadow under the moonlight, but it was there. A dark figure, human-like but indistinct, moving across the lake without a sound. I snapped a picture, my heart racing, then turned to leave, feeling an overwhelming urge to flee. But as I turned, I found my path blocked by an old woman, her eyes intense under the brim of a faded hat. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice urgent. "The shadow in the lake." Nodding hesitantly, I responded, "Yes, I saw something. Do you know what it is?" Her eyes, reflecting the moonlight, seemed to flicker with a mix of sadness and fear. "That's the guardian of the lake," she said softly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It appears to those who are drawn to uncover the secrets of this place. You must be cautious, child. Its appearance is not without meaning. It is both a warning and a protector of the depths." The idea of a guardian spirit was something out of local myths, the kind of stories told to keep curious kids away from dangerous waters. But after everything I had witnessed, I was not so quick to dismiss her words. "Why does it show itself to me?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite the chilling fear that gripped me. "You are touching on truths that have been dormant for ages. This lake," she gestured toward the serene yet ominous body of water, "holds more than just water. It mirrors the history and secrets of this land. Those who seek to uncover these are often tested by the guardian." As the cold fog enveloped us more tightly, the old woman pulled a small, tattered book from her coat pocket. "This was my grandfather's," she explained, handing it to me. "He was a keeper of sorts for this lake. He believed that understanding the guardian could prevent further tragedies. Maybe this will help you." Taking the book, I felt a weighty responsibility settle over me. It was filled with handwritten notes, sketches of the lake and its surroundings, and detailed accounts of encounters with the guardian. The more I read, the more I understood that this was not just a ghost story. It was a part of the lake's living history, intertwined with the lives of those around it. Determined to learn more, I spent the next few days combing through the book and revisiting the archives at the local library. With each piece of history unearthed, the lake seemed to grow more alive, its calm surface deceptive of the activity beneath. Each night, I returned to the dock, hoping to observe more, to understand better. The guardian did not appear again, but the feeling of being watched remained. One evening, As I sat by the lake, the air still and the night quiet, the surface of the water began to ripple without a cause. The ripples formed a pattern, one that matched a diagram in the old woman's book. A summoning symbol. It was then I realized that the guardian was not just protecting the lake's secrets, it was guarding a gateway. The knowledge was overwhelming, and the implications were terrifying. If the lake truly was a gateway, what lay on the other side? And what would happen if that gate were opened? I knew then that my stay at the Lakeview Hotel was no longer just a simple getaway. I was involved in something much larger than myself, something that tied me to the lake and its mysterious guardian. As the days slipped by, I found myself drawn deeper into the lore of the lake and its guardian. My nightly vigils by the water became a routine, each observation adding another layer to my understanding, yet raising more questions than answers. The tranquility of the lake's surface belied the complexity beneath, just as the serenity of the hotel masked the intense undercurrent of my investigation. On what was to be my final night at Lakeview, I ventured down to the dock with a resolve to confront whatever lay behind the guardian's appearances. I carried the old woman's book, now filled with my notes and observations alongside her grandfather's. As I reached the dock, the air was unusually still, the lake mirroring the starry sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where the water ended and the heavens began. From the luminous depths, a figure emerged. Not the shadowy form of the guardian I had glimpsed before, but a distinctly human shape. As it approached the shore, the figure became clearer. A woman, her features eerily similar to the old woman who had given me the book. She stepped onto the dock with a grace that seemed to defy the simple act of walking. "I knew you would call," she said. "You've learned much, yet you seek more." Confused and startled, I replied, "I don't understand. Are you the guardian? How are you here?" She smiled, a knowing, mysterious smile. "The guardian is not one, but many. We are the protectors of this place, chosen from those who once sought its secrets, just as you have. Our task is to ensure that the knowledge does not fall into the wrong hands, for within the lake lies a portal to realms forgotten by time, realms that must not be disturbed without need." My mind reeled at her implication. "Are you saying that I?" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "You have been chosen to join us. Your curiosity, your determination, and your respect for the power of this place have proven your worthiness." "But what about my life, my job, everything outside of this?" I protested, my voice tinged with desperation and awe. "Yours will continue, but you will also serve as a guardian, a keeper of secrets and a protector of the gateway. You will live with one foot in each world, just as I have." She gestured to the calm waters. "The lake chose you, Claire, just as it chose me long ago." As she spoke, the first light of dawn touched the lake, turning the water into a canvas of golden hues. I looked at the shimmering surface, now a boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary, and realized that my world had expanded infinitely. With a sense of awe and responsibility, I accepted my new role, ready to protect the mysteries just beneath the surface, guarding them for the future and learning from them as I straddled the two realms. My fate sealed. I had always dreamed of a quiet retreat, a place where my thoughts could unfurl without the relentless noise of city life. That's why the secluded cabin in the woods seemed perfect, a serene sanctuary where I could finally start my novel. The advertisement promised isolation and tranquility, exactly what I needed to overcome the writer's block that had plagued me for months. Arriving at the cabin on a chilly autumn afternoon, I was struck by the rustic beauty of the place. Nestled among towering pines, it offered an idyllic setting that seemed ripped from the pages of a novel. As I unpacked my belongings and set up my old typewriter, I felt a surge of inspiration. It was here, I was convinced, that I would write my masterpiece. The first night passed peacefully, and I awoke feeling refreshed and eager to write. As I explored the cabin more thoroughly in the morning light, I discovered a drawer in the writing desk that was stuck. Curious and looking for a distraction from the daunting blank page, I wrestled it open, revealing a stack of papers. They were pages from a manuscript yellowed with age and curling at the edges. Intrigued, I began to read, quickly becoming engrossed in the story. It was a novel about a series of murders in a small, isolated town. The narrative was compelling, chilling even, with a level of detail that was unsettling. As I read on, I realized why the manuscript unnerved me so deeply. It described murder scenes that perfectly mirrored a series of unsolved murders that had occurred in this very area over the past year. The realization sent a shiver through me, not of cold, but of fear. The manuscript was dated several years before the murders had actually happened. How could a forgotten story in a dusty drawer eerily predict real-life events? My mind raced with possibilities. Coincidence, a practical joke, or something more sinister? Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the next few hours researching the previous occupants of the cabin. The trail led to an author, Mr. Arthur Green, who had rented the cabin years ago but had vanished without a trace, leaving behind his unfinished manuscript. His disappearance had remained a mystery, much like the plot of his novel. The deeper I dug into Arthur's life and the subsequent murders, the more the boundaries between fiction and reality blurred. The characters in the manuscript began to bear a startling resemblance to real people from the town, some of whom were murder victims. Each chapter in the manuscript ended with a cliffhanger, mirroring the unresolved nature of the actual murder cases. Feeling a growing sense of paranoia, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rustling of the trees seemed like whispers, and every creak of the cabin felt like a footstep. Was I losing my mind, or was I living in a story dictated by the unfinished manuscript? With each passing hour, the story's grip tightened, its dark narrative intertwining with the reality of the unsolved murders. As sunset approached on my second day at the cabin, I stumbled upon a chilling chapter that hadn't been there the first time I read through the manuscript. It detailed a murder that was eerily similar to what could be my own. The victim was an unsuspecting writer, lured to the cabin under the guise of solitude. Panic set in as I realized that the story was predicting my death, scheduled to occur before I could finish my novel. I was now a character in a deadly narrative, with less than 48 hours to alter my fate. The manuscript was not just predicting murders, it was orchestrating them. I needed to finish the story, to write the ending before it was written for me. Determined to survive and solve the mystery of the manuscript and the murders, I set out to confront the story head-on, rewriting my role in what appeared to be a predetermined plot. Armed with determination and a growing sense of dread, I decided to change the ending of the manuscript to ensure my survival. My fingers flew over the typewriter keys as I crafted new scenes, introduced new evidence that pointed to the identity of the murderer, and most crucially, wrote myself out of the victim's role. But as I wrote, strange occurrences began to disrupt my focus. Objects around the cabin moved seemingly on their own, and chilling gusts of wind blew through closed windows, scattering my pages. It felt as though the cabin itself was resisting my efforts to change the narrative set forth by Arthur Green's original text. I pressed on, driven by the fear of meeting the same fate as the characters in the manuscript. After a sleepless night of rewriting, I had crafted what I hoped was a new conclusion. One where the killer was caught and brought to justice before he could claim his final victim, me. With the new manuscript complete, I took a moment to breathe, thinking I might have just saved my own life. However, as I relaxed, the old typewriter began to type on its own, the keys clacking rapidly. Horrified, I watched as it undid my changes, reverting back to the original story written by Arthur. Realizing that merely changing the manuscript was not enough, I knew I needed to understand why these murders were happening and how they were linked to Arthur's disappearance and the manuscript. My investigation led me to the local library, where I delved into newspaper archives for anything related to the murders or Arthur's life. After hours of digging, I uncovered an old article that mentioned a feud between Arthur Green and another local author, Mr. Charles Devon. The article hinted at a bitter rivalry over their writings and accusations of plagiarism. Charles had vanished shortly after Arthur, which had never been solved. Connecting the dots, I wondered if Charles might have taken over Arthur's manuscript to orchestrate the murders as a twisted form of revenge, using the narrative to control the events. Maybe Charles was still out there, pulling the strings to ensure the manuscript's predictions came true. Armed with this new theory, I visited the address listed for Charles in the old town records. The house was decrepit, nearly swallowed by the overgrowth of vegetation, but as I approached, I felt certain that answers lay within. Inside, I found a shrine of sorts to Arthur Green, complete with newspaper clippings, photos, and multiple copies of the manuscript. Before I could investigate further, I heard the creak of a floorboard above me. Heart pounding, I called out, announcing my presence and my knowledge of the murders. "Charles, I know what you've done. It's over," I shouted into the stillness. The figure that emerged from the shadows was not an old revenge-driven writer as I expected, but a haggard, almost ghostly woman, Mrs. Devon, Charles's widow. She confessed that after her husband had disappeared, she discovered his plan to ruin Arthur and had decided to continue his work, using the manuscript to control the narrative of the town and its tragedies. Distraught but resolute, I convinced Mrs. Devon to turn herself in, explaining that no story was worth the pain and horror she had inflicted. We called 911 together, and she was taken into custody, the manuscript's deadly predictions finally put to an end. With the mystery resolved, I returned to the cabin, the weight of the past few days heavy on my shoulders. I packed up my belongings, the manuscript tucked safely away, never to be used again. The story had finally ended, but the impact of those terrifying days would linger. And as the cabin disappeared from my rearview mirror, I made a silent vow to keep writing, no matter the cost, because I now understood the true power of words. They could shape worlds, change fates, and reveal the deepest truths, even those hidden in the secluded woods. I had only been at Hollowbrook Middle School for a few weeks, but the legend of Room 13 had already woven itself into my 7th grade imagination. Rumors swirled among the students about the cursed classroom, where it was said that those who entered never truly left the same. My curiosity, often my guiding and damning light, lured me to uncover the truth behind these chilling tales. One crisp fall afternoon, as shadows lengthened and the corridors emptied, I found myself standing before the infamous Room 13. My heart pounded as I reached for the cold metal handle, ignoring the whispers of warning from my more cautious classmates. The door creaked ominously behind me as I stepped inside, sealing my fate within its eerie confines. The room was shrouded in an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the weak afternoon light. As the door clicked shut, a suffocating silence enveloped me. My breaths echoed off the walls, the only sound in a sea of stillness. Panic began to claw at my chest. I desperately fumbled along the wall for a light switch, but found nothing. My hands shook, and my flashlight slipped from my fingers, its light extinguishing upon impact with the ground. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. Hunger gnawed at my stomach and thirst parched my throat, but it wasn't just physical discomfort that twisted my insides with fear. Whispers slithered through the darkness, taunting me with hints of betrayal and deceit. Shadows seemed to dance just at the edge of my vision, their malevolent presence suffocating. As I stood frozen in fear, I realized that the stories were more than just schoolyard tales. The air grew colder, and I could feel the subtle shift of energy as though something unseen was moving around me. My mind raced, every story I had heard about Room 13 replaying in vivid detail. They spoke of a student decades ago who entered the room and was never seen again. Teachers whispered about mysterious writings that appeared on the blackboard, only to be erased and never spoken of. Determined to not succumb to the growing terror, I tried to trace my steps back to the door, but the room seemed to have rearranged itself, the familiar layout now a confusing labyrinth. Every turn I took led me back to the center of the room, where the temperature dropped even further, and the air felt charged with a silent warning. The whispers grew into murmurs, then shouts. Accusations of treachery and warnings of doom converged in a cacophonous symphony that overwhelmed my senses. In a desperate attempt to escape the noise, I covered my ears, only to touch something wet and sticky. Pulling my hands back, I strained to see in the poor light, but could not identify the substance. Just as I felt my resolve waver, threatened by the encroaching madness, a dim light flickered in the corner of the room. It was coming from underneath what appeared to be an old wooden desk. Crawling towards it, driven by both fear and hope, I found an ancient oil lamp emitting a weak but steady flame. Next to the lamp lay a journal, its pages yellowed with age. Opening the dusty book, I discovered it was a diary belonging to the student who had disappeared. The entries detailed their own experiences in room 13, describing the same eerie phenomena I was encountering. The final entry was unfinished, the sentence cut off abruptly, the pen still lying beside the open page, as if hastily abandoned. The realization hit me hard. I was reliving the same nightmare, caught in a loop that had claimed who knew how many before me. The journal was a warning, a guide perhaps, left by the previous victim to help the next. With trembling hands, I read about a hidden exit, a way out known only to those who had braved the depths of the room's secrets. Gathering every shred of courage I had left, I followed the instructions laid out in the journal. They led me to a loose floorboard under the same desk where I had found the diary. With effort, I pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downwards into darkness. Crawling through the tunnel, I emerged outside behind the school, gasping for air and bathed in the light of a full moon. The door to room 13 remained closed, its secrets lurking just beyond reach, waiting for the next curious soul. As I write this now, safe in my room, the memories of that day are as vivid and terrifying as ever. The legend of room 13 is real, and I am proof that it claims more than just the sanity of those who dare uncover its truths. Hollowbrook Middle School will continue to educate its students, but beneath its hallowed halls lies a darkness that is both a warning and a whisper, calling to those drawn to the unknown. And as for me, I am forever changed, a survivor of room 13, with a story that few would believe and even fewer would dare to investigate. I moved to Ravenwood just as the fall air turned crisp, the town draped in the vibrant colors of dying leaves. The quaint charm of this small town belied its intense passion for basketball, particularly when it came to the annual championships. The Ravens, our home team, had been undefeated for years, and as the season's climax approached, the excitement was palpable. Yet this year, whispers of something darker began to circulate among the locals. They spoke of a curse, a chilling tale that traced back to a former Ravenwood player named Samuel Blackwood. It was said he had made a deal with the devil to guarantee the team's success. But when the time came to pay his dues, Samuel vanished, leaving behind only a cryptic note: "Beware the final game." The legend always seemed like just that, a legend. Until I attended my first Ravenwood championship game. The gym was packed, the air thick with anticipation and an unspoken dread. As the game commenced, I could sense a strange tension among the players. They moved with a heaviness, as if each dribble and pass were burdened by the weight of the town's dark legacy. Halfway through the game, with the score unnervingly close, a hush fell over the crowd. From my seat near the top of the bleachers, I spotted a figure slipping into the gym. A man. I moved to Ravenwood just as the fall air turned crisp, the town draped in the vibrant colors of dying leaves. The quaint charm of this small town belied its intense passion for basketball, particularly when it came to the annual championships. The Ravens, our home team, had been undefeated for years, and as the season's climax approached, the excitement was palpable. Yet this year, whispers of something darker began to circulate among the locals. They spoke of a curse, a chilling tale that traced back to a former Ravenwood player named Samuel Blackwood. It was said he had made a deal with the devil to guarantee the team's success. But when the time came to pay his dues, Samuel vanished, leaving behind only a cryptic note: beware the final game. The legend always seemed like just that, a legend. Until I attended my first Ravenwood Championship game. The gym was packed, the air thick with anticipation and an unspoken dread. As the game commenced, I could sense a strange tension among the players. They moved with a heaviness, as if each dribble and pass were burdened by the weight of the town's dark legacy. Halfway through the game, with the score unnervingly close, a hush fell over the crowd. From my seat near the top of the bleachers, I spotted a figure slipping into the gym, a man wearing a tattered Ravenwood jersey. His presence sent a cold shiver down my spine. It couldn't be, yet every whisper around me seemed to confirm it. Samuel Blackwood had returned. His eyes, gleaming with a ghostly light, scanned the gym, settling on the players with a predatory gaze. The air around us grew colder, the lights flickered, and the boundary between reality and nightmare began to blur. The players' movements became erratic, their faces twisted in fear as Samuel's spectral form glided across the bleachers. As the final seconds of the game ticked down, the score tied. A suffocating silence enveloped the gym. In that silence, Samuel's figure seemed to grow, his presence filling the space with dread. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, he vanished just as the buzzer sounded. The gym erupted in chaos. The lights cut out completely, plunging us into darkness punctuated only by screams and the sounds of scrambling feet. When the emergency lights stuttered on, the scene on the court was one of horror. The players lay scattered across the floor, unmoving, their faces frozen in terror. The game had ended, but the curse had claimed its due. In the days that followed, the town of Ravenwood was shrouded in mourning and fear. No one spoke of victory. No one celebrated. The championship trophy was left forgotten, tarnished by the night's events. I walked the mist-shrouded streets, the echoes of the past whispering with each step. The curse was no longer just a story, it was our reality. Samuel's warning had been clear, yet it had been ignored by those blinded by pride and the desire for success. Now, the cost of that ignorance was etched into the soul of Ravenwood. The town was enveloped in a lingering melancholy, its people moving through the streets like shadows, haunted not only by the tragedy of the championship game, but also by the growing realization that the curse might not be satisfied with a single night's horror. In the weeks that followed, peculiar incidents began to unfold around Ravenwood. Unexplainable malfunctions plagued the school's electrical system, lights flickering on and off, classroom projectors turning on spontaneously in the middle of the night, displaying static-filled screens that no technician could diagnose or repair. The local wildlife, too, seemed altered. Crows gathered in unprecedented numbers, their cawing filling the mornings and evenings with ominous symphonies that unnerved even the most skeptical residents. The community tried to move past the events, to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of Samuel Blackwood's return was ever present. Then, one misty evening, as the town prepared to mark the anniversary of the cursed game with a solemn vigil, a shocking discovery was made at the school. The gymnasium, locked since that fateful night, was found open, the trophy once forgotten inside now prominently displayed in the center of the court, surrounded by a circle of 13 black candles that had burned down to stubs. This eerie tableau reignited the fears of the townspeople, confirming that the curse was not merely a remnant of the past but an active, malevolent force continuously influencing the present. The school became a focal point for the town's fear, and despite numerous attempts to cleanse and sanctify the space, the disturbances only intensified. Amid this growing crisis, I received an unexpected visit from an old woman who claimed to have been Samuel Blackwood's high school teacher. Her name was Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, and she brought with her a collection of Samuel's personal journals, which she had kept safe since his disappearance. Mrs. Whitmore believed these journals contained clues about the nature of Samuel's pact and possibly a way to break the curse. As we pored over the journals together, we discovered references to an ancient text, a grimoire that Samuel had sought out to gain the power he believed would secure the team's victories. The entries became increasingly erratic towards the date of his disappearance, with mentions of a final game that would seal the pact or break it forever, depending on its outcome. Determined to find this grimoire and uncover a way to save Ravenwood, Mrs. Whitmore and I embarked on a quest that led us deep into the local archives and later to a secluded part of the forest where Samuel had conducted many of his secretive rituals. There, hidden in a decayed trunk of an old tree, we found the grimoire, its pages filled with arcane symbols and rites far darker than we had anticipated. Our discovery brought new hope, but also new danger. As we began to decipher the text, strange occurrences escalated. Whispers filled the night, shadows moved against the grain of natural law, and an inexplicable chill settled over the town. It was as if the very act of uncovering the grimoire had awakened a dormant evil, eager to resist our efforts to undo the harm it had caused. The final piece of the puzzle came when we learned that the curse could be broken only during a total eclipse, an event that, by fortunate or perhaps fated coincidence, was due to occur over Ravenwood in just a few weeks. The alignment would provide the necessary conditions to conduct a counter-ritual outlined in the grimoire, which would either liberate the town from its spectral tormentor or condemn it to eternal darkness. As the day of the eclipse approached, the entire town of Ravenwood united, their resolve fortified by the shared desire to reclaim their home from the shadows of the past. Preparations for the counter-ritual were meticulous, every detail scrutinized and every contingency planned for. Mrs. Whitmore and I led the ceremony. The townspeople gathered around us in a circle of solidarity, their faces set with grim determination. The eclipse began, and as darkness temporarily overtook the day, we commenced the ritual. The air crackled with energy, the boundary between worlds thinning, allowing us to glimpse the twisted visage of Samuel Blackwood, his form flickering between reality and nightmare. Words of power were spoken, ancient and binding, their echoes shaping the fate of Ravenwood. As the shadow of the moon passed and light began to return, so too did a profound stillness. Samuel's figure dissipated like smoke in the wind, the oppressive weight that had hung over the town lifting in an almost palpable release. Cheers broke out among the townspeople, tears of relief mingled with laughter, a sound long absent from the streets of Ravenwood. While the aftermath of that day left Ravenwood scarred, it also brought a newfound strength to its community. The curse that had lingered like a cloud over the town was lifted, and with Samuel Blackwood's spectral presence banished, a collective sigh of relief swept through the streets. The sense of normalcy began to return. Children laughed more freely as they played, and parents no longer whispered in hushed tones about the shadows of the past. The gymnasium was reopened, renovated, and rededicated not just as a place for sports but as a symbol of the town's resilience. Each basketball game became a celebration of more than just sport. It was a triumph over the darkness that had once threatened to consume them. Mrs. Whitmore, who had become something of a heroine, continued to teach at the middle school, now also offering a class on local history, ensuring that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. The grimoire, sealed and secured, was locked away in the town's historical society vault, a reminder of the power that knowledge, both good and ill, can hold. As for me, my involvement in breaking the curse had changed me. I found a calling in the preservation of our local lore, working alongside Mrs. Whitmore to educate others about the importance of understanding and respecting the forces that shape our world. My nights of fear transformed into days filled with purpose, helping to ensure that no such darkness could ever take hold again. Our annual remembrance of the day the curse was lifted became a town-wide event, a festival filled with light and joy. However, we always took a moment to remember the cost of our freedom from the shadows, honoring those who had suffered and the spirit of the young man who had made a deal that changed the course of our town's history. The legend of Samuel Blackwood and the cursed championship game of Ravenwood Middle School gradually became a tale of caution and courage. It served as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the dark paths it can lead us down. Years later, as I walk through the town of Ravenwood, the echoes of the past still whisper through the streets, but they speak now of victory and vigilance. My friends and I have always been urban explorers. Truthfully, we never found much. That was until the day we stumbled upon a decrepit old cabin that seemed as though it had been swallowed by time itself. The eerie silence that enveloped the place drew us in, compelling us to venture inside. With cameras rolling to capture every moment, we stepped through the creaking doorframe, eager and anxious about what lay inside. The cabin was shrouded in dust and decay, relics of a bygone era scattered haphazardly throughout the rooms. Amidst the ruins, we discovered a pile of old VHS tapes, each marked with dates stretching back decades. Our curiosity ignited, we decided to gather up the tapes and take them, hoping they held the keys to unravel the mysteries of the cabin. That evening, nestled safely in our campsite, we inserted the first tape into a battered old VCR we'd brought along. The screen flickered to life, revealing grainy footage of a family picnic in the very woods that now sheltered our tents. Laughter and joy filled the scenes as children played under the golden glow of a setting sun. But as darkness crept over the forest, an unsettling feeling began to permeate the footage. The laughter seemed distant, and shadows lengthened unnaturally. With each new tape, the footage grew increasingly disturbing. Strange shadows darted just beyond the tree line, low whispers cut through the night air, and pairs of glowing eyes peered from the darkness. It was as if the forest itself was alive, its ancient presence watching us through the static of the tapes. As we delved deeper into the recordings, the line between past and present blurred. Objects in our camp began to move inexplicably. Whispers mirrored those from the tapes, rustling through the leaves around us. The sensation of being watched intensified, clawing at our nerves, paralyzing us with fear. The final tape was the most harrowing. It showed the same family we had seen enjoying their picnic, now terror-stricken, fleeing through the underbrush. The camera shook violently, capturing fleeting glimpses of something pursuing them. A form too quick and distorted to discern. The tape ended abruptly, the screen consumed by static as screams echoed in the background. That night, none of us could sleep. The forest seemed to close in around us, each rustle and crack a harbinger of something sinister. Driven by a desperate need for answers, we again played the final tape with trembling hands. The last recording was chaotic. The person filming ran through the forest, breaths heavy and panicked. Suddenly, the camera steadied, and there it was. A creature I can barely describe. It was grotesque, with gnarled limbs and eyes that glowed with a malevolent fire. It moved with terrifying agility, darting between trees. The footage captured its pursuit of the family, their cries a stark soundtrack to the nightmarish hunt. Then the camera fell, landing on its side, providing a skewed view of the forest floor. The scream stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The only sound was the creature's labored breathing, fading into the distance. We sat in stunned silence, the reality of our situation settling in. Whatever had hunted that family was still here, in these woods, possibly watching us as we uncovered its deeds. The decision was made to leave at first light, but the forest had other plans. That night, our camp was thrown into chaos. Tents were torn apart, supplies scattered, and in the confusion we became hopelessly separated in the dark. I found myself alone, heart pounding, navigating by memory and the weak light of my dying flashlight. Dawn seemed an eternity away as I stumbled through the underbrush, every sound magnifying my terror. Finally, after what felt like hours, I emerged onto a road and followed it back to civilization, never once looking back. The ordeal did not end as I crossed into the familiar streets of the small town bordering the woods. Relief was a foreign concept, replaced instead by an underlying dread that clung to me like the damp morning mist. As I trudged towards the local sheriff's office, my mind raced with concern for my friends who remained unaccounted for. Upon reaching the office, drenched in sweat and forest debris, I was met with a scene of controlled chaos. Officers were organizing search teams, their radios crackling with static as they coordinated their efforts. I learned there that one of my friends, Michael, had been found just an hour earlier by a search team. He was delirious, mumbling incoherently about the eyes in the darkness and a chilling lullaby that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. They rushed him to the local hospital, where he was placed under psychiatric observation. However, there was no sign of Emma and John. The search teams had scoured the areas where we had camped and found nothing but our scattered belongings and the camera that had recorded our harrowing experience. The footage was now in the hands of the sheriff, who was both skeptical and deeply concerned about the events it depicted. As I provided my statement, a sense of unease settled over the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a man of practicality, scoffed at anything related to my superstitions. The following days were a blur of interviews, restless nights at a local motel, and visits to the hospital to see Michael, who slowly regained his composure but could not recall much of what had happened after that final, fateful night. The memory of the creature and the woods seemed to have been wiped clean from his mind, leaving behind a shell of paranoia and confusion. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Emma or John. The search was eventually called off, the sheriff declaring it a tragic case of lost hikers fallen prey to the wilderness. The town slowly moved on, but I could not. I was haunted not only by the loss of my friends, but by a growing suspicion that something had followed me from the woods. That suspicion turned to cold reality one evening as I was packing to leave town. In the mirror's reflection of my motel room, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing in the corner. I spun around, heart racing, only to find the room empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. From that night on, the figure in the shadows visited frequently, always in reflections, windows, mirrors, water surfaces, and always just out of clear sight. Its presence was accompanied by a soft, eerie whisper, like the one Michael had mentioned, a lullaby that seemed to beckon me back to the woods. Driven by a desperate need for closure and understanding, I returned to the forest. I walked the same paths we had taken, past the same cabin where we found the tapes, and deep into the heart of the woods. There, in a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, I found a circle of stones and in the middle, a small pile of ashes. As the sun set, the forest around me grew unnaturally quiet. The whispering began again, louder now. And from the shadows stepped Emma and John, or rather what was left of them. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions blank. They spoke in unison, their voices not their own, telling me they had stayed to protect me, to keep the creature from following me out of the woods. We stood there in the twilight, the cursed lullaby rising around us, as they explained that they were now part of the forest. They warned me to leave and never return, to live my life but never forget. With a heavy heart, I left them there, in the deepening dark of the cursed woods, and walked back into the world of the living, carrying with me the burden of their sacrifice and the echoes of the haunting lullaby that I knew would someday call me back. My name is Janice, and I am currently working an internship at a law office. While most people I work with opt for the modern lifts in neighboring buildings, I made the terrible decision to use the old elevator. The one that's as old as the building. And to be exact, that is 104 years old. One stormy night, when I stayed late to finish a project, I found myself trapped inside this very elevator. As I stepped into the elevator, the lights flickered ominously, casting unnerving shadows that danced around me. The doors closed with a slow, groaning sound, and the ascent began. But halfway up, the elevator shuddered violently and came to a jarring halt, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the doors and screamed for help, only to be answered by an eerie silence. The fear of being isolated in this metal coffin enveloped me, making my heart pound with primal dread. The air grew increasingly stale, and my breaths became shallow gasps as the reality set in. I was alone, utterly alone. The hours that followed were marked by the steady drip of water echoing somewhere in the depths of the building. My mind began to play tricks on me, with whispers of voices taunting me from the shadows. I could feel eyes on me, unseen but ever present, watching my every move. As darkness continued to press in on me, My thoughts twisted and warped, spiraling into a waking nightmare. Memories I had long buried resurfaced, and fears I had never dared to confront overwhelmed my fragile sanity. My grip on reality loosened as days blurred into nights. During one particularly dark moment, the elevator lurched unexpectedly. My heart leapt with a fleeting hope of rescue, but it was merely the building settling. Another trick against my fraying nerves. At times I thought I heard footsteps or muffled voices through the walls, but each time I called out, the oppressive silence returned with even greater force. I began to hallucinate, seeing faces in the patterns of the elevator walls, hearing clear, distinct voices calling my name. Each hallucination seemed more real than the last, blurring the lines between reality and delusion beyond recognition. My mind fractured under the weight of isolation, each moment stretching into an eternity as I grappled with my deepest, darkest fears. One night, or what I perceived to be night, I saw the doors crack open slightly, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. A shadowy figure appeared, whispering promises of escape. Desperate, I approached, only to have the doors slam shut as I neared, the figure vanishing into thin air. It was then I realized my mind had created its torturer, manifesting my innermost fears into apparitions that haunted me relentlessly. As my ordeal stretched on, I felt my sanity slip further away, replaced by a numbing detachment from reality. It was in this state that the elevator suddenly jolted back to life. The doors slid open with a smooth, steady motion, revealing the lobby of the building bathed in the early morning light. Stumbling out, my body shaking uncontrollably, I was met with a mix of relief and lingering terror. I had survived the ordeal, but the psychological scars were indelible. As I walked out into the bustling city, people rushing about their daily lives, I felt alienated, as though I had returned from a different dimension. I reported the incident, but an inspection of the elevator found nothing amiss. No malfunctions, no faults. It worked perfectly, as if mocking my account of the ordeal. People were sympathetic but skeptical, attributing my story to stress and overwork. But I knew what I had endured. The memories of that harrowing experience in the elevator were indelible, etched deep into my psyche. Compelled by a mix of dread and determination, I began to delve into the building's history, searching for any clue that might shed light on my ordeal. My investigation led me to uncover numerous complaints and incidents linked to the elevator, but one particular case stood out. A recent disappearance that had quietly slipped through the cracks of public awareness. Her name was Emily, a part-time cleaner who reportedly vanished after clocking in for her night shift, her last known location being the very elevator I had been trapped in. This revelation reignited my resolve. I had to know if her fate was connected to my own experience, and if so, how. I reached out to Emily's family, who were desperate for answers and willing to collaborate on any lead that might explain her mysterious disappearance. Together, we pressured the building management to review all security footage from the night Emily vanished. After days of persistent inquiries, we finally gained access to the tapes. The footage was unsettling. Emily entered the elevator just as I had, and the doors closed behind her. But as the elevator began to ascend, the video flickered erratically, distorting the image into an almost unrecognizable state. When the image stabilized moments later, the elevator was empty. Emily was gone without a trace. The timestamp on the footage indicated that the disruption occurred at exactly the same time as my ordeal had begun weeks earlier. The implications were chilling, suggesting that whatever phenomenon had trapped me in the elevator was not only still present but capable of far worse. Armed with this new evidence, Emily's family and I confronted the building's owners, demanding they shut down the elevator for a thorough investigation. Reluctantly, the owners agreed, and a team of engineers was brought in to examine the elevator. The inspection was thorough, uncovering decades-old mechanisms and outdated wiring that were immediate red flags, but nothing that could explain the supernatural experiences I had reported or the disappearance of Emily. The engineers were about to conclude that the elevator simply needed modernizing when one younger technician, who had been quietly reviewing the old schematics of the building, called over his supervisor. He pointed to a section of the blueprint that had been hastily taped over. Curious, the team peeled back the layer, revealing a hidden compartment in the elevator shaft, not accounted for in the original design. The discovery prompted a deeper investigation. The compartment was difficult to access, located between two floors, effectively invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. With specialized equipment, the team managed to open the compartment to find an assortment of strange artifacts: old coins, a set of dusty books bound in leather, and a small box containing rolls of film that appeared to be decades old. These films, when later examined, turned out to be personal recordings of the building's original owner, Mr. Ross. The footage was grainy, but it showed him speaking directly to the camera about his belief in spiritual dimensions and his intent to create a transcendental bridge through the elevator. He spoke of specific dates and celestial alignments that would activate the elevator's true purpose, aligning eerily with the occurrences of my own experience and Emily's disappearance. This evidence was turned over to the authorities, who began to treat the elevator not just as a faulty piece of machinery, but as a potential crime scene linked to past unsolved disappearances associated with the building. The elevator was shut down permanently, and the building was put under strict surveillance while a deeper investigation was initiated. As word of the elevator's strange history and the discoveries spread, the building became something of an urban legend in the city. Tours were organized to discuss its history, contributing to local folklore but always under the watchful eye of security to prevent any unauthorized access. For me, the revelations brought a mix of relief and new fears. Relief that I wasn't imagining the terror I felt, and that Emily's disappearance was being taken seriously, but also fear of how much we didn't understand about the world. The elevator had been a portal to something beyond our comprehension, a piece of machinery that touched the unknown. The city decided to turn the building into a museum dedicated to the paranormal and unexplained phenomena, with the elevator as its centerpiece. Sealed and visible behind reinforced glass, panels explained its history and the theories about its purpose. I often visited the museum, drawn to the place that had changed my life. Watching others learn about the elevator, I felt a strange camaraderie with Emily and even Mr. Ross, all of us bound by this enigmatic machine. While some mysteries remained unsolved, the museum ensured that our stories, warnings and all, would not be forgotten. The elevator stood as a silent reminder of the thin veil between our world and what lies beyond, a veil that, once lifted, demands respect and caution from all who dare to peek behind it. My partner John and I really needed to get away from the relentless bustle of city life. We yearned for simplicity, for a return to nature, but little did we know that our new neighbors, the reclusive Peterson family, would introduce a terror into our peaceful existence that was anything but simple. From the moment we set foot in our quaint cabin, a sense of unease hung in the air, thick and palpable. The Petersons, shrouded in mystery, inhabited a dilapidated house that barely held itself together, much like the secrets it seemed to contain. On the rare occasions they ventured outside, their piercing stares felt as if they could penetrate straight through to the soul, leaving a cold shiver that lingered long after their shadows had passed. As the days stretched into weeks, the strangeness of our surroundings began to unveil itself. At night, unearthly sounds reverberated through the woods, chilling us to the bone and disrupting the stillness of our new life. Supplies dwindled alarmingly fast, as if the forest itself conspired against us, severing ties with the outside world more effectively than any isolation we had anticipated. Each attempt John and I made to bridge the gap with the Petersons was met with cold rejection. Their cryptic warnings, murmured from behind half-closed doors, hinted at dangers that went unexplained, intensifying the mystery and our growing apprehension. But it was one stormy evening when the true horror began to unravel. As darkness enveloped our cabin, the wind howled like the cries of the damned, carrying with it whispers laden with dread. Huddled inside, John and I realized with a rising panic that we were not alone. Shadows flitted just beyond the corners of our eyes, ephemeral yet distinctly present, and the sensation of unseen hands brushed against our skin, sending involuntary tremors through our bodies. In our living room, with the storm raging against the windows, a voice, low and haunting, seemed to echo through the depths of the cabin. It was neither John's nor mine, and its origin was as intangible as the shifting shadows. Leave, it hissed, a simple command that carried the weight of an ominous threat. Driven by a primal instinct to protect our sanctuary, John and I scrambled to secure every door and window, barricading ourselves against the unknown. As we worked, the eerie silence that followed each gust of wind was punctured by the distant, haunting cries of creatures we had never heard before. Our meager supplies, which we had gathered in the naive belief they would suffice for a simple life, dwindled with each passing hour of the siege. The isolation within our cabin became oppressive, a tangible force that seemed to feed on our fear. The unknown horrors lurking just beyond our makeshift barricades played havoc with our minds. Paranoia crept in, whispering that the threat was as much internal as it was external. Was this terror orchestrated by the Petersons, or had we stumbled upon a nightmare that had lain dormant in these woods, waiting for unsuspecting souls like ours to awaken it? As the storm gradually subsided, giving way to an uneasy stillness, John and I dared to believe we might survive whatever had besieged us. We waited for the dawn, for any sign of light to breach the darkness that had settled both outside and within us. With the first timid rays of morning light, we ventured outside, our relief at having survived the night quickly turning to confusion and then to dread as we approached the Petersons' home. The house, previously a looming, dilapidated shadow in our lives, stood eerily silent. It was completely abandoned. The door swung on its hinges, revealing empty rooms covered in layers of dust as if it hadn't been inhabited for years rather than just the night before. As we stood there, staring into the heart of darkness that had engulfed our neighbors, the chilling realization dawned upon us. Whatever haunted these woods might have claimed the Petersons long before we arrived. And now, having marked us, it might never let us go. This harrowing realization was the beginning, not the end, of our ordeal. The fear of the unknown, the terror of isolation, and the harrowing struggle for survival would forever haunt our nights, a relentless reminder of the price we paid for seeking solitude in the embrace of these ancient woods. The Petersons' absence posed more questions than it answered, and John and I returned to our cabin with a gnawing sense of dread. We were no longer naive about the darkness that lurked in the forest or the eerie silence that seemed to suffocate the air around us. That afternoon, as we gathered our nerves and bolstered our resolve, we decided to delve deeper into the history of our new home and its unsettling neighbors. I started combing through old property records, local archives, and any online snippets of folklore I could find about the area. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon an old forum dedicated to supernatural occurrences in rural areas. One thread in particular caught my eye, an account of a family, much like the Petersons, who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago under similar circumstances. The forum post detailed how the family had been deeply involved in esoteric practices believed to protect them from an ancient curse tied to the land. According to the post, every few decades, the curse would awaken to claim new guardians, who were then bound to protect the forest's darkest secrets or face dire consequences. With this new information, John and I decided to search the Petersons' home more thoroughly, hoping to find anything that could help us break the cycle. As we sifted through decades of accumulated belongings, we found a hidden door beneath a loose floorboard. It led to a small, dust-choked room filled with bizarre artifacts, old books on occult practices, and a detailed journal belonging to the head of the Peterson family. The journal was a revelation. It chronicled the family's long-standing role as guardians of the forest, detailing rituals and ceremonies performed to appease the ancient forces dwelling within it. Most chillingly, it described the transition process, where the current guardians would pass on their duties to the next chosen ones. This looked to be us. Armed with this knowledge, we realized that escaping was no longer an option. The forest had chosen us, just as it had chosen the Petersons before. If we wanted to survive, we would have to embrace our new roles, or at least understand them enough to find another way out. That night, we decided to perform one of the simpler rituals described in the journal, hoping to communicate with the forest and negotiate our freedom. Under the ghostly light of the moon, we traced the symbols described in the journal onto the earth, lighting candles at each cardinal point as instructed. As we chanted the ancient words, the forest seemed to come alive. The wind howled, branches creaked, and a thick fog enveloped us. From the mist, a figure appeared. An old man, his eyes reflecting the moonlight, piercing through the fog with unsettling clarity. It was the patriarch of the Peterson family, or his spirit at least. He spoke in a voice that rustled like dry leaves, explaining that the forest was a living entity, ancient and powerful, bound by old magic to protect something deep within its heart. The guardians were not just protectors, they were also sacrifices, bound to the forest until their duties could be handed over to the next chosen ones. Desperate, we pleaded for another way, any way that would release us from this terrifying obligation. The spirit of the patriarch remained unmoved until John, in a moment of inspiration, offered a deal. He proposed a new guardian, not human, but a protector we would create from the forest itself. Intrigued, the spirit agreed to consult the ancient powers. Days passed in a tense silence, each moment stretching out endlessly. Finally, the spirit reappeared with a decision. The forest accepted our offer. Using the rituals detailed in the Peterson's journal, along with every ounce of our own ingenuity and desperation, we fashioned a guardian from the trees themselves. We carved runes into its wooden limbs and anointed it with oils made from the sacred herbs found in the forest. When the final incantation was spoken, the guardian stirred to life, its wooden eyes aglow with otherworldly energy. Relieved of our duties, John and I watched as the wooden guardian took its first lumbering steps into the heart of the forest, the mist swallowing it whole. The pact was complete, and the spirit of the Peterson patriarch faded into the forest, his parting words a whisper on the wind, thanking us for our sacrifice and cleverness. In the weeks that followed, the forest grew calm, and the eerie occurrences ceased. John and I packed our belongings, the weight of our experience heavy on our shoulders. As we drove away from the cabin, I looked back at the dense forest that had been our home and prison. It was peaceful now, but the shadows within hinted at secrets still hidden under its canopy. We returned to the city, forever changed by our ordeal. We spoke little of what happened, but the lessons we learned about bravery, sacrifice, and the mysteries of the old woods shaped our lives in countless ways. The forest and its new guardian lingered in our dreams, a haunting reminder of the time when we stood at the edge of an unseen world and walked away free. My name is Evelyn, and I had a terrible job with the circus. I was forced to entertain the masses night after night. But of all the circus horrors, I loathed the clowns the most. Their painted faces and hollow eyes sent a shiver of fear deep into my bones. Each evening as I entered the circus ring, I steeled myself, plastering a false grin on my face while I danced and twirled to the eerie music that filled the tent. From the shadows, the clowns leered at me, their laughter ringing in my ears like a sinister chorus that followed the rhythm of my trembling heart. As the weeks turned into months, a new terror began to gnaw at my sanity. It wasn't just the sight of the clowns that haunted my dreams. It was the creeping sensation that I was losing control over my own actions. The lines between reality and the nightmares that plagued my sleep blurred until I found myself questioning every move, every thought. One fateful evening, as I pirouetted under the tent's dim lights, a sense of dread washed over me. The clowns' painted smiles seemed to stretch wider than physically possible, their eyes boring into me with an intensity that felt almost tangible. I could almost hear their taunts, feel their gazes dissecting my every step. And then it happened. One of the clowns, his face a grotesque mask of joy, reached out with a gloved hand, beckoning me closer. As if pulled by unseen strings, I found myself moving towards him, my body no longer under my command. The tent spun around me, the music crescendoing into a loud, discordant cacophony that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Suddenly I snapped back to reality, the eerie spell broken. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding against my ribcage, the realization dawning on me. The clowns were not mere performers, they were something far more sinister. They were masters of illusion, puppeteers who wove a web of fear and control that had ensnared me without my even knowing. With a newfound resolve, I decided at that moment to break free from the circus, to flee into the night and escape the twisted reality that had become my prison. As I ran, the sound of laughter and eerie music chased me, haunting every step with its mocking tone. But I knew deep down that the fear of losing control would forever linger in the shadows of my mind, a chilling reminder of the horrors I had faced under the big top. My escape from the circus did not end the nightmares. Instead, it marked the beginning of my true understanding of what terror really was. The tale of my struggle, of the reluctant circus performer who battled against the twisted forces that sought to bend her will, became a cautionary legend whispered in the shadows of circus tents everywhere. The fear of losing control, of being manipulated by unseen forces, resonated with all who heard my story. For in the world of the circus, where reality and illusion blend so seamlessly, the true horror lies not in the grotesque or the supernatural, but in the depths of our own minds. As I fled into the night, the cold air bit at my cheeks, reminding me that the world outside the circus was as real as the terror I had just escaped. Each step away from the tent was a step toward reclaiming my sanity, yet the feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at the edges of my newfound freedom. In the weeks that followed my escape, I lived in a state of heightened vigilance. I found a small apartment in a neighboring town, keeping a low profile, avoiding crowds and any place that might remind me of the circus. Despite my efforts, the sense of being part of a show, of performing for unseen eyes, lingered. Every shadow hinted at lurking figures, every laugh in the street echoed the clown's sinister chuckles. Determined to confront my fears and to understand the source of my torment, I began researching the history of the circus and its performers. I scoured old library archives, spoke with town elders, and even tracked down former circus employees. Each person I interviewed added layers to the circus's dark legacy, stories of disappearances, mysterious accidents, and performers who, like me, had tried to escape their invisible chains. One name that surfaced repeatedly was Mr. Albertini, the original founder of the circus. Described as both a charismatic leader and a manipulative showman, Albertini was rumored to have delved into dark arts to enhance his circus's allure. His fascination with control and illusion had, according to some, cursed the circus for generations. Armed with this knowledge, I resolved to face my past. I returned to the now dilapidated circus grounds under the cover of darkness, determined to find any artifacts or symbols linked to Albertini's rituals that might still linger. The place was as eerie and deserted as my memories had painted it, the tent flaps fluttering in the wind like the whispers of trapped souls. Inside, the ring was choked with weeds, but I pressed on, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. In Albertini's old caravan, hidden beneath a false floorboard, I discovered a collection of old tomes and artifacts, dust-covered and forgotten. Among them was a journal. Albertini's journal, filled with notes on his experiments with mind control and fear, using his performers as unwilling test subjects. The journal revealed the depth of Albertini's madness, but also provided the key to dismantling the lingering effects of his influence. He had created a talisman, an amulet that he believed concentrated his control. According to the journal, destroying the amulet would break the cycle and free the circus from its cursed legacy. After days of searching, I found the amulet concealed within a secret compartment of Albertini's caravan. It was a grotesque piece, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. With no time to spare, I took the amulet to the center of the circus ring, where the energy felt strongest. Using the instructions from the journal, I set up a circle of salt around me for protection and began the incantation to dissolve the dark magic. The air grew thick, the wind howled, and shadows twisted around me, pressing in as if to stop me. But I pressed on, my voice steady as I recited the words that would end the nightmare. As I spoke the final syllable, the amulet shattered, releasing a burst of energy so intense it knocked me to the ground. The wind died down instantly, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a silence so profound it rang in my ears. In the weeks and months that followed, the nightmares that had haunted me began to fade, and to my surprise, I no longer feared clowns. The circus grounds were eventually cleared, the land repurposed for a public park where laughter and joy now echoed, free from the shadows of its past. I was no longer just Evelyn, the circus performer. I was a survivor, a woman who had stared into the abyss and reclaimed her life. And while the circus was gone, the lessons it taught me about fear, control, and the power of resilience would stay with me forever. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones that free not just ourselves but generations to come. I had always found solace in the quiet aisles of bookstores, where stories whispered from every corner, beckoning to be read. But one rainy afternoon, I wandered into a quaint bookshop that I had never noticed before, tucked away on a forgotten street corner. The sign, whispering pages, creaked as it swung above the door, an eerie welcome that should have been my first warning. As I stepped inside, a musty smell of old paper and adventure enveloped me. The shop was dimly lit, with rows of shelves laden with books that seemed to hum with a strange energy. The old wooden floor creaked under my feet as I meandered through the aisles, drawn by the awe of boundless narratives. It was then that I stumbled upon a peculiar section labeled "Immerse Yourself." The books here looked older, their spines cracked and covers faded as if they had been read by countless generations. Curiosity piqued. I reached for a particularly worn tome titled "The Labyrinth of Echoes." No sooner had I opened the book to the first page than the lights flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Thunder rumbled in the distance, mirroring the stormy scene described in the opening lines of the story. A chill ran through me, not from the storm outside, but from the eerily accurate depiction of the weather that seemed too coincidental. Engrossed in the narrative, I hardly noticed the world around me shifting subtly. The storm outside intensified, and the winds howled like the wailing of lost souls. It wasn't long before I realized that the musty, book-laden air of the shop had been replaced by a damp, earthy smell, and the floor beneath me was no longer the familiar feel of polished wood but cold, hard stone. Panic set in as I lifted my eyes from the page. The bookstore had vanished. Instead, I found myself standing in the entrance of a massive stone labyrinth, the one described on the page I had just read. The book had become my reality, trapping me within its story. My heart pounded as the true horror of my situation became apparent. I was in a cursed bookshop that sold novels which could trap readers in their narratives, with deadly outcomes if they couldn't finish the book in one sitting. Desperate to find a way out, I flipped through the pages, searching for any clue or map of the labyrinth that might help me escape. The story unfolded with each turn of the page, revealing trials and traps that I soon encountered in real life. Walls shifted, floors opened to reveal abysses, and creatures that were the stuff of nightmares prowled the shadows, each more terrifying than the last. Remembering the shop's warning, "Immerse yourself," I realized that I had to complete the book to escape. With no other choice, I pushed forward, using the narrative as my guide through the treacherous maze. The labyrinth was cunning, changing its layout with each decision I made, as if the book was writing itself with me as the protagonist. As I approached what I hoped was the climax of the book, deep within the labyrinth's intricate network of passageways, I came upon an unexpected guardian. It was a colossal clockwork owl, its body constructed from brass gears and polished copper plates, eyes glowing with a soft, phosphorescent light. The owl sat perched atop a pile of ancient tomes and mechanical debris, turning its head with a smooth, calculated motion to fix its gaze upon me. This mechanical marvel was not just a sentinel, it was the keeper of the labyrinth's secrets, designed to challenge the intellect and determination of any intruder. Its presence signified the final test, as dictated by the pages of the cursed book one held. To navigate past this guardian, I would need to solve a series of riddles encoded within the gears of the owl itself, each answer bringing me closer to the exit or leading me further into eternal entrapment. Relieved yet daunted by the task ahead, I stepped closer to the mechanical owl, my footsteps echoing slightly in the cavernous chamber. The owl's head tilted, observing me with an intensity that belied its inanimate nature. Around its neck hung a small, intricate key, shimmering under the dim light. A clear invitation, or perhaps a challenge. Speak the truths hidden beneath the gears of time. The owl intoned, its voice a harmonious blend of whirring cogs and chimes. I realized then that this was no ordinary mechanical construct. It was imbued with the magic of the story itself, designed to interact and challenge any reader daring enough to reach this point. The first riddle was engraved on a brass plate at the base of the owl's perch. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. What am I? I pondered for a moment before the answer struck me. An echo. With a soft click, one of the gears on the owl's chest rotated, revealing the next riddle. What has keys but can't open locks? This one took me less time. A piano. I responded, feeling a rush of adrenaline with each correct answer. The owl's eyes glowed brighter with each solution, and the final riddle presented itself. What can run but never walks, has a mouth but never talks, has a head but never weeps, has a bed but never sleeps? I hesitated, my mind racing through the possibilities before it clicked. A river. At my final answer, the owl spread its wings wide, the sound of gears and steam filling the room as it revealed a pathway previously hidden behind its massive form. The key around its neck detached itself and floated towards me, landing gently in my palm. It was the key to my freedom, the way to end this terrifying and surreal adventure. Grasping the key tightly, I navigated down the newly revealed pathway, each step fueled by a mixture of fear and anticipation. The walls of the labyrinth seemed to recede, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as I moved closer to the exit. When I finally emerged from the labyrinth, the world seemed to brighten, the storm that had started my ordeal now nothing but a gentle drizzle. The oppressive weight that had settled on my shoulders as I wandered the twisted passages lifted, leaving a palpable sense of relief and newfound clarity. As I stepped out of the shadows of the bookshop and into the muted sunlight, I could hardly believe I was walking on familiar streets. The ordinary sights and sounds of the town felt surreal, as if I was experiencing them for the first time or through new eyes. My heart still raced, but now with exhilaration from my escape, rather than fear. I had always been fascinated by historical sites and was excited when presented with the opportunity to tour Dunwich Manor. Its old walls stood imposing against the backdrop of a grey, cloud-filled sky as our tour group approached. It was late October, and the air was thick with the promise of an impending storm, which only added to the eerie atmosphere of our Halloween-themed tour. As our guide, a man named John, dressed in period-appropriate garb, ushered us inside, he began to regale us with tales of the manor's storied past. It had been built in the late 1700s by a wealthy shipping magnate named Edward Dunwich, whose family had been plagued by misfortune. Whispered legends spoke of a curse that afflicted all who dwelt within its walls. The tour started harmlessly enough, with John showing us the grand foyer adorned with portraits of stern-looking ancestors and opulent antique furniture that spoke of the family's once great wealth. However, as we delved deeper into the manor, the air grew colder, the lighting dimmer, and the decor shifted from grandiose to unsettling. Statues with hollow eyes seemed to follow our every movement, and grotesque tapestries depicted scenes of the macabre rather than the majestic. We descended into the lower levels of the manor, where the family crypt was located. Here, the walls were lined with the sealed vaults of the Dunwich lineage. John's voice grew hushed as he shared how locals still reported seeing lights flicker in this part of the manor at night, despite no power running to the old circuits. It was said the Dunwiches were restless, their spirits not quite settled. It was in the crypt, surrounded by the silent whispers of the dead, that I noticed a small, nondescript door partially hidden behind a drapery. Curiosity overcoming caution, I slipped away from the group to investigate. The door was unlocked, and it creaked ominously as I pushed it open to reveal a narrow, spiral staircase descending into darkness. Compelled by a mix of fear and intrigue, I descended the steps, my only light the dim glow of my phone's flashlight. The air grew musty and damp as I reached the bottom, finding myself in a long-forgotten sub-basement. This part of the manor was not on the official blueprints, and it felt as if no one had set foot here in centuries. The room was filled with artifacts and old furniture covered in dust sheets. As I pulled the cloth off one item, a cloud of dust billowed into the air, revealing an intricately carved mirror standing against the wall. Its surface was tarnished, but as I gazed into it, the glass began to clear, and a figure appeared behind my reflection. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there, just the empty room and the echo of my own movements. I turned back to the mirror, and my breath caught in my throat. The figure was clearer now, a spectral image of a woman in Victorian dress. She was writing something on the glass from her side, her expression tormented. As I watched, the words became legible, forming a chilling message: "Help us." At that moment, the sound of footsteps echoed down the staircase, and I hastily covered the mirror. It was John, calling out for me, concern evident in his voice. He found me standing amidst the relics of the past, my face undoubtedly pale with shock. "We must return to the group," he said firmly, offering no explanation for the sub-basement's existence. As we ascended the stairs, I glanced back at the covered mirror, the woman's plea, etched into my memory. Rejoining the tour felt surreal, as if the secret room and its ghostly occupant were part of another world entirely. My mind raced with questions about the woman in the mirror and her desperate plea for help. John noticed my distracted demeanor and kept a close eye on me as we moved through the remaining rooms of the manor. The tour concluded in the grand dining hall, where a final tale was told. This one spoke of Elizabeth Dunwich, Edward's wife, who had vanished without a trace one stormy night. It was rumored that her spirit still haunted the manor, seeking someone to free her from her eternal torment. The story made my blood run cold, the details hitting too close to the experience I had just endured. Determined to learn more, I approached John after the tour. I asked him about the sub-basement and the mirror. At first he feigned ignorance, but something in my expression must have convinced him of my sincerity. He sighed, a look of resignation passing over his features. "Few know of that place," he confessed in a low tone, glancing around to ensure we were not overheard. It was Edward's private study, where he delved into things best left alone. After Elizabeth disappeared, he sealed it off. It should have remained so. John agreed to let me examine the mirror once more, but only under his supervision. We returned to the sub-basement, the air thick with the weight of unspoken secrets. As I pulled the sheet off the mirror, the chill in the room deepened. There she was, Elizabeth. Or I should say, her apparition. Waiting as if she knew I would return. "Help us," she wrote again on the mirror, her spectral hand moving with urgency. "Who is us?" I asked aloud, not sure if she could hear me. "The trapped," she wrote back. "The souls Edward bound to the manor with his dark experiments. We are bound to his fate, unable to move on." The implications were horrifying. Edward's quest for knowledge had ensnared more than just his family. It had trapped everyone connected to the manor in a perpetual loop of suffering. Elizabeth's spirit was just one of many, and they all needed release. "Is there a way to free you?" I asked, empathy and resolve strengthening my voice. "The key." Elizabeth's spirit wrote back in the mist of the mirror, her message clearer than ever. "Return the key to its rightful place." Confused, I turned to John. "What key is she talking about?" John's face turned pale as he pulled a small, ornate key from his pocket. This was Edward's personal key, said to unlock something valuable or dangerous, or perhaps both. He wore it always, but it was found in the study after he disappeared. He hesitated, his hands slightly shaking as he handed me the key. I never knew what it was meant to unlock. Perhaps it was never meant for a door in the physical sense, but something else, bound within the estate. We followed Elizabeth's guiding presence, which seemed to emanate from the mirror, down to the basement's deepest corner. There, hidden under layers of dust and cobwebs, we found a small, intricately carved box that matched the key perfectly. It felt almost warm to the touch, as if it were alive with a pulsing energy. As I inserted the key and turned it, a click echoed through the silent room, sounding far louder and more significant than it should have. Slowly, I opened the box. Inside, there was no treasure or secret documents as one might expect. Recovering from the flu had left me exhausted and strangely sensitive to my surroundings. The illness itself was a grueling 2-week ordeal, with nights drenched in sweat and days blurred into a cough-racked haze. As my health returned, I anticipated a return to normalcy, to my usual routines. Yet what I encountered was anything but normal. My apartment, a small 1-bedroom place I had lived in comfortably for years, suddenly seemed unfamiliar. The first night after declaring myself recovered, I was awakened by a soft tapping sound. At first I dismissed it as the building settling or perhaps the radiator acting up again. However, as the nights progressed, the tapping grew more persistent and seemed to follow a peculiar pattern. Driven by a mix of curiosity and a desperate need for a good night's sleep, I decided to investigate. The sound seemed to emanate from the walls of my bedroom, specifically near the closet. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to decipher the pattern, when suddenly the tapping stopped. In its place, a cold chill swept through the room, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as though someone had breathed right next to me. The next morning, feeling more perturbed than rested, I mentioned the incident to my neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, an elderly lady who had lived in the building since its construction. Her face grew pale when I described the tapping and the subsequent cold. She told me that the previous tenant of my apartment, a young man about my age, had experienced similar phenomena. "He was ill too, just like you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He said the tapping would come every night, and then one day he just left. Couldn't take it anymore, he said." The story left me uneasy. The logical part of my brain insisted there must be a rational explanation, a leaky pipe or faulty wiring. Determined to prove to myself that there was nothing supernatural at play, I spent the following day inspecting every inch of my bedroom. Yet everything was in order, with no sign of anything that could produce such sounds or chills. That night, as I lay in bed, the tapping resumed. This time it was louder, more insistent. Frustrated and a little frightened, I banged on the wall in response, hoping to scare off whatever rodent or mechanical fault was causing the noise. To my shock, the tapping responded, mirroring my pattern. 3 bangs from me, 3 taps in return. Realizing that this was no pipe or critter, I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with terror. I left my bed and approached the wall slowly. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause, then as clear as day, right next to my ear, I heard a soft, sorrowful sigh. I stepped back, heart pounding in my chest. This was not happening. I couldn't be living in a haunted apartment. Ghosts didn't exist, yet the evidence was hard to deny. Over the next few days, I documented everything, recording the sounds, noting the times, and even keeping a log of the temperature changes in the room. The phenomenon did not cease. If anything, it became more active. With each passing day, the atmosphere in the apartment grew heavier, the air colder, and my nights less restful. I started to dread the coming of darkness, the setting of the sun, a signal for the unseen to make itself known. It was during one particularly long night, filled with the now familiar tapping, that I decided enough was enough. I needed help. Resolved to confront whatever haunted my apartment, I reached out to a local paranormal investigation team. They were intrigued by my recordings and the consistency of the phenomena, agreeing to spend a night in my apartment to conduct a thorough investigation. The night they arrived, they set up various devices, EMF meters, thermal cameras, and audio recorders in my bedroom and the surrounding area. The lead investigator, a serious woman named Dr. Harper, briefed me on the procedure. "We'll monitor the room from your living room," she explained. "You should try to sleep, or at least pretend to. It's important we recreate the usual conditions under which the activity occurs." Despite the oddness of the situation, the presence of the team in the next room gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt in weeks. Time ticked by slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Then, as if on cue, the tapping began. This time, however, it was different. It was not just tapping, but a rhythmical knocking that seemed to move around the room. Dr. Harper and her team were quick to action, tracking the source with their equipment. The thermal camera picked up fluctuations in temperature near the closet, exactly where I had heard the sigh that night. "Look at this." Dr. Harper called me over to view the monitor. The screen showed a distinct cold spot moving slowly around the room. It's highly unusual for a cold spot to move like that without a discernible draft or other explanation. As we watched, the cold spot stopped near the wall where the tapping often seemed loudest. Dr. Harper handed me a pair of headphones. "Listen," she instructed. Through the static, I could hear a faint, almost imperceptible voice. It was so soft that I could barely make out the words, but it sounded like someone whispering desperately for help. The rest of the night passed with the team capturing more anomalies, but nothing as clear as the voice on the recording. As dawn approached, the activity seemed to wane, and the apartment grew still. Once the sun was up, Dr. Harper and her team began to pack up their equipment. "We've gathered some compelling evidence tonight," she said, reviewing notes on her tablet. "I need to analyze the recordings and go over our findings in more detail, but it's clear there is something unusual happening here." Exhausted but unable to sleep, I thanked them for their help and sat down with a cup of coffee to reflect on the night's events. It was clear now that I was not imagining things, that the eerie occurrences were not just the remnants of my illness-induced delirium. Something was trapped here, something that perhaps once lived here or had some unfinished business in this space. Determined to find answers, I decided to visit the local library to research the history of the building and its previous inhabitants. Perhaps there was a clue in the past, something that Dr. Harper's analysis might miss. Hours later, armed with old newspaper clippings and property records, I began to piece together the tragic story of a young woman who lived in my apartment in the early 1900s. Her name was Clara, and she had mysteriously disappeared without a trace one winter night. The newspapers hinted at foul play, but no one was ever charged, and her case eventually went cold. Could Clara be the source of the haunting? Was it her voice begging for help? The more I read, the more I felt a strange connection to her. A sense of responsibility to help her find peace. Refocusing my efforts, I decided to delve further into Clara's history. This exploration would focus purely on historical facts and tangible evidence that could explain the phenomena I experienced. I spent the next few days immersed in archives and historical databases, trying to unearth any documents or reports about Clara and the property. It turned out that Clara had been a prominent figure in the community, known for her charitable works and beloved by many. Her disappearance had left a void in the town, and oddly, it seemed that after her disappearance, her family swiftly moved away, leaving many of their possessions behind. Dr. Harper and I reconvened with a new plan based on the findings. We decided to use environmental sensors to detect any unusual changes within the apartment that could be linked to natural causes. Perhaps, I thought, there was a logical explanation, like fluctuations in electromagnetic fields or even infrasound waves that could be causing the sensations and sounds I attributed to a haunting. As we set up the equipment, the familiar chill filled the room, and the soft tapping began once again. Instead of addressing the unseen, I monitored the readouts on the environmental sensors. The results were intriguing. Each tapping coincided with a spike in electromagnetic activity. Dr. Harper noted, "This might suggest that what you've been experiencing could be tied to these spikes, not necessarily a presence or a spirit." Encouraged by this scientific explanation, we continued to gather data. Throughout the night, patterns began to emerge that correlated specific environmental changes to the times I experienced the strange phenomena. These findings suggested that perhaps the structural integrity of the building, combined with unique environmental factors, created the perfect storm of eerie occurrences. As dawn approached, we had collected hours of data and documented several more instances of the phenomena. While we had no definitive answers yet, the evidence was leading us away from the paranormal and towards a peculiar but natural explanation. Feeling a mix of relief and fatigue, I thanked Dr. Harper for her rational approach and dedication. As she packed up her equipment, she offered some parting thoughts. Sometimes our desire to find a connection to the past, especially with stories as emotional as Clara's, can color our interpretation of events. Science doesn't always disprove the paranormal, but it does offer us a means to understand the boundaries of our reality. As she left, I stood by the window watching the morning light spill across the city. The room felt different now, not because the tapping or the cold had disappeared, they hadn't, but because my understanding of them had changed. I felt armed with knowledge and ready to continue exploring the mysteries of my home, albeit from a more grounded perspective. As the days passed, my fear of the apartment lessened. I continued to document the occurrences, now with a scientific approach in mind. The data I collected, along with Dr. Harper's analyses, pointed increasingly toward natural explanations for the phenomena that had once seemed supernatural. This shift in perspective didn't diminish the wonder of the experience. If anything, it deepened my appreciation for the complexities of our world. One evening, as I sat by the window sipping tea, I reflected on how this journey had changed me. I had started out as a beleaguered tenant, haunted by illness and inexplicable occurrences, and had become, through effort and inquiry, a caretaker of memories and a student of the unseen forces that shape our perceptions. The last time the Hargraves family had all been together was over a decade ago, but this year, someone had decided it was time to reignite old bonds and breathe life into forgotten connections. I had reluctantly agreed to attend, driven more by curiosity about my estranged relatives than any real sense of family loyalty. As I drove down the long, winding road to the old Hargreaves estate, nestled deep in the backwoods of Virginia, a feeling of unease began to creep over me. The estate was a colonial-style mansion, its once pristine facade now marred by peeling paint and overgrown ivy. The lawn, however, had been meticulously trimmed for the occasion. I was greeted by Aunt Maisie, who, despite her warm smile, had eyes that seemed to hold a hint of warning. She ushered me inside, where the air was thick with the scent of old wood and faint whispers of the past. As the day faded into evening, more family members arrived, each bringing with them a palpable sense of unease that seemed to cling to their skin like the humid air outside. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall, a room lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow you around the room. The meal was filled with stilted conversation and forced laughter, the underlying tension as thick as the dust that coated the chandelier overhead. After dinner, Uncle George, the unofficial patriarch of the family, suggested we gather in the living room for a storytelling session. A chance to share our histories and horrors, he said with a theatrical flourish that did not quite reach his eyes. As the fire crackled in the hearth, the room dimmed by nothing but the soft glow of candlelight, my relatives began to recount tales not of ghostly hauntings or supernatural encounters, but of personal tragedies and eerie coincidences that had plagued our family for generations. It was during these stories that I began to feel a chilling sense of foreboding. Each story seemed to hint at a dark undercurrent that ran through our family line, a curse of sorts that no one dared to speak of directly. Tales of unexpected disappearances, unexplained accidents, and untimely deaths wove a tapestry of misfortune that seemed too patterned to be mere coincidence. As the night deepened, I excused myself to get some air. Outside, the night was oppressively still, the silence broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. That's when I noticed a small, overgrown path leading away from the house, disappearing into the dark woods. Compelled by a mix of fear and an inexplicable pull, I followed it. The path led to a neglected part of the estate, an old graveyard where the earliest Hargraves were buried. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the worn tombstones, and as I read the names and dates, a cold realization washed over me. Every death coincided with a family reunion, each separated by exactly 10 years, the same interval that had brought us together tonight. A sudden rustling behind me snapped me back to the present. I turned around quickly but saw nothing but the dense thicket of trees swaying gently in the breeze. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried back to the mansion, the weight of my family's haunted past pressing down on me. Back inside, I found the atmosphere had shifted. The earlier joviality had evaporated, replaced by a somber reflection, as if everyone had simultaneously remembered the same dark secret. I decided to confront Uncle George, to ask him about the patterns I had seen in the graveyard, but before I could reach him, a scream shattered the calm. The family rushed toward the sound, coming from the library. There, we found Cousin Lisa, staring in horror at a book she had pulled from a shelf. A detailed account of the Hargreaves curse, predicting that tonight, one of us would not survive. As pandemonium ensued in the library, the family's collective fear transformed into a palpable terror. Some called for calm, others whispered fervently among themselves, debating the authenticity of the book Lisa had found. Uncle George tried to restore order, his voice booming above the din. "This is preposterous. It's just an old family tale meant to scare the children." But his assurances did little to soothe the frayed nerves. I watched as Aunt Maisie quietly slipped away from the chaos, her expression unreadable. Curiosity piqued, I decided to follow her, leaving the anxious murmurs behind. She led me down a narrow hallway that I hadn't noticed before, its walls lined with ancient portraits that seemed to watch us pass. Aunt Maisie stopped in front of a dusty, ornate door at the end of the hallway. She pulled a small key from her pocket and unlocked it, gesturing for me to enter. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, meticulously organized with shelves filled with old books and documents. "This," she said in a low voice, "is where the truth lies." The room was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and as Aunt Maisie lit a few candles, their flickering light revealed piles of journals and letters dating back centuries. She handed me a journal, the leather cover cracked and worn. "Read this," she instructed. "It explains everything." The journal belonged to the founder of the Hargreaves estate, and as I flipped through its pages, a story unfolded. One of dark pacts and a curse invoked out of desperation and spite. The founder had sought power and protection for his family through forbidden rituals, but the price was steep. A life taken every 10 years at the reunion to maintain the family's fortune and status. The revelation was horrifying, yet it explained the unnerving patterns of death that coincided with each gathering. Aunt Maisie watched me as I processed the information, her face a mask of resigned sadness. "Not all of us believe or even know about this," she confessed, "but those who do, we've tried to stop it. We thought it was just superstition, until it took my brother at the last reunion." Determined to end the cycle, I asked, "What can we do?" Aunt Maisie shook her head, uncertainty clouding her features. "I'm not sure. The last entry mentioned a possible reversal, but it's incomplete." We spent the next few hours poring over the texts, searching for any clue that could help us break the curse. Each book and letter seemed to only deepen the mystery, with cryptic references to a final reunion and the last descendant's choice. As we worked, the house seemed to groan under the weight of its history, the wind howling outside as if in warning. When we finally returned to the rest of the family, the tension had reached a fever pitch. Accusations flew, fueled by fear and the fight for survival. Amid the turmoil, I realized we needed a plan, something to bring everyone together and prevent another tragedy. I proposed a makeshift council, gathering those who were oldest and most knowledgeable about the family law. Surprisingly, even in their fear, the family united, their instinct for preservation overtaking the panic. We convened in the old study, its walls lined with books on arcane knowledge and history, each one a testament to the Hargreaves' long and troubled past. Here, we laid out everything we knew and discussed the possible ways to protect ourselves through the night. As the night deepened, our collective unease transformed into a shared vigilance. Uncle George, taking on an unspoken role as our protector, decided that we should all stay together in the main living room where the open space and multiple exits offered a sense of security. The ancient fireplace was stoked into a roaring fire, casting a warm glow that fought back the encroaching darkness from the unlit corners of the room. We must rely on each other tonight, Uncle George declared, his voice steady despite the obvious tension in his eyes. No one is to wander alone for any reason. We'll take shifts watching the doors and windows and keep the fire burning until morning. Mrs. Jennings, the family historian, pulled out an assortment of family records and maps of the estate, suggesting we use the time to perhaps understand more about our family's murky history. If there's an answer or an explanation to our family's misfortunes, it might be hidden in these documents, she said, spreading them out on the large oak coffee table. Surrounded by my relatives, I felt a curious blend of camaraderie and fear. As some perused old letters and faded photographs, I found myself drawn to a series of journals written by a great aunt who had always been rumored to be a bit eccentric. Her writings were scattered and cryptic, but hinted at deep-seated guilt and a desperate desire to protect the family from something she referred to only as the shadow. Intrigued and slightly alarmed by these references, I shared them with the group. As we delved deeper into the night, each story unearthed seemed to weave a denser tapestry of our family's dark intertwining with the inexplicable. Uncle George, who had initially resisted acknowledging the supernatural aspects, shared a particularly unsettling incident from his youth. He described how, on a similar night many years ago, he had seen shadows moving independently of their sources and heard whispers echoing through the halls of this very house, attributing them to the wind, until now. The more I hear, he confessed, his voice a blend of wonder and apprehension, the more I realized that perhaps these were not mere childhood fears or tricks of the light. Aunt Marion, a librarian with a penchant for genealogy, pulled out a dusty old tome from a box labeled Family Miscellany. "This was your great-grandfather's journal," she explained, handing it to me with a solemn look. He wrote extensively about the family curse, believing it stemmed from a wronged ancestor seeking vengeance. As I flipped through the brittle pages, the words written in a hurried scrawl, the room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. The journal outlined a series of misfortunes that had befallen the family, each incident detailed with a mixture of scientific detachment and a palpable dread. It wasn't just the events themselves that were alarming, it was the pattern they revealed. Every decade, on the night of the reunion, something terrible occurred, just as the family gathered, hoping against hope that this time they would be spared. My cousin Lydia, a psychologist, chimed in thoughtfully. "It's like we're living in a self-fulfilling prophecy. We gather, fear builds, and our collective anxiety possibly invites these occurrences. But what if it's not just psychological?" Interjected my second cousin Tom, a former police officer who had seen his share of unexplainable events on the job. What if we're actually drawing something out, something real and tangible? The discussion turned to theories ranging from the psychological to the paranormal, each relative bringing their own perspective based on their experiences and beliefs. This blend of views only enriched our understanding and, strangely, our bond as a family. Inspired by the sharing, I suggested, why don't we document these stories? Not just for us, but for future generations. Maybe if we start facing these fears, recording them, analyzing them, we might find a way to end this cycle. As dawn approached, a plan had formed. we would create a comprehensive family archive, a repository of all these stories, experiences, and research that could perhaps one day provide answers. Uncle George, rejuvenated by this proactive approach, declared, "Let's make this a new family tradition. Every reunion, we update the archive." The sun rose, casting a warm glow over the room that had been filled with shadows just hours before. As we packed up the papers and prepared for breakfast, there was a sense of accomplishment and a new hope. We had not yet solved the mystery of the family curse, but we would. After breakfast, we took a family photo, the first in many years, in front of the old house. As we stood together, I realized that whatever might come, whatever truths lay in the darkness, we would face them together. The fear of the unknown still lingered, but it was now tempered with knowledge, with support, and most importantly, with a united front. Online dating had always seemed like a minefield of mismatched intentions and awkward encounters, but my curiosity eventually outweighed my hesitation. After hearing countless stories from friends about their various exploits and misadventures, I finally decided to dive into the digital dating pool myself. Little did I know one particular connection would take me on a journey far stranger and more unsettling than I could have ever imagined. It all started innocently enough with a profile that caught my eye. The user, who went by the name Julian, had a witty bio and an intriguing collection of photos that struck the perfect balance between adventurous and introspective. Intrigued, I swiped right, and to my delight, we matched. The chat that ensued was refreshingly engaging. Julian was articulate and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences, a rarity in the often superficial interactions of online dating. After a week of delightful digital banter, we agreed to meet in person. We decided on a cozy cafe, known for its quiet atmosphere and excellent coffee. I arrived a bit early, nerves tingling with the anticipation of meeting Julian face to face. As I waited, I watched people come and go, wondering about their lives and whether they too were meeting strangers from the internet. Julian arrived exactly on time, looking just like his pictures. The initial awkwardness quickly dissipated as we fell into easy conversation. However, as we talked, a few odd details began to emerge. Julian mentioned places he had supposedly visited, but his descriptions were vague and at times contradictory. When I asked about a recent trip he had mentioned online, he brushed it off with a laugh and steered the conversation to other topics. As the date progressed, I noticed Julian's attention shift subtly. He glanced often at his phone, typing messages under the table. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut, attributing it to first date jitters. But then, halfway through our coffee, he excused himself to take a call and never came back. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, confused and a little embarrassed, before finally deciding to leave. Back home, I sent Julian a message asking if everything was okay. No response came. The next day, his profile disappeared from the app. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Disappointed but not entirely surprised, I chalked it up to the unpredictable nature of online dating and moved on. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, while scrolling through a different dating app, I stumbled upon a profile that looked eerily familiar. The name was different, James, but the photos were unmistakably Julian. Curiosity piqued, I created a fake profile and swiped right. To my surprise, we matched, and the conversation started again. This time, however, I was determined to uncover the truth. I played along, engaging James in conversation while subtly probing for inconsistencies. His stories varied wildly from those Julian had told me. New cities, new jobs, even different hobbies appeared in his tales. It was as if he was a completely different person, or rather, as if he was intentionally crafting a persona designed to allure and deceive. Determined to see how deep this rabbit hole went, I agreed to meet him again, this time as a supposedly different person. We set a date and location, the same cafe where I had met Julian. As I prepared for the encounter, my mind raced with possibilities. Who was this man really? What was his goal? Was it merely the thrill of deception, or something more sinister? As the day of the meeting approached, my nerves tingled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Armed with the knowledge of his duplicity, I felt like a detective stepping into a sting operation, unsure of what the outcome might be. I arrived at the cafe earlier than planned, choosing a secluded spot where I could observe the entrance without being easily noticed. James arrived on time, looking exactly as he did in his photos, just as Julian had. The déjà vu of the situation sent a shiver through me. I watched him scan the room, his eyes a calm sea of calculation. After a moment, he settled at a table with a clear view of the entrance and ordered a coffee. He seemed unperturbed, casually checking his phone as he waited. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I approached the table. He looked up, his smile polite but guarded. "Hi, you must be Michelle," he said, standing to greet me, a gesture of courtesy he hadn't extended as Julian. I nodded, slipping into the role I had created for this encounter. The conversation started off light, with the usual pleasantries and small talk. However, as we delved deeper, I steered the discussion toward more personal topics, testing the waters to see if he would slip into familiar patterns or reveal more discrepancies. James talked about his work in graphic design, a stark contrast to Julian's claimed career in environmental science. The ease with which he wove his narrative was unnerving. He was either a seasoned liar or a man of many lives. Halfway through our coffee, I mentioned a fictional friend who had encountered a strange situation similar to mine with Julian. James's reaction was subtle, but his eyes flickered with a smidge of recognition, or perhaps wariness. "People can be so strange online," he mused, his voice a mixture of amusement and a hint of something darker. "You never really know who you're talking to." Indeed, I thought, watching him closely. As the date progressed, I felt increasingly conflicted. The person sitting across from me was charming and engaging, yet underpinned by a layer of mystery that bordered on the sinister. What was his endgame? Was it merely the thrill of the deception, or was there a more malevolent motive behind his actions? Determined to push a bit further, I asked directly about his experiences with online dating. He laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes, and began sharing tales of misunderstandings and misrepresentations. "It's all a game, really," he said, swirling the coffee in his cup. "Sometimes you play the character that fits the narrative. It keeps things interesting." The statement hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. I nodded, playing along while internally my mind raced. This man didn't just use fake profiles. He reveled in the manipulation, crafting characters and narratives with the ease of a novelist. As we parted ways, James hinted at meeting again, leaving the possibility hanging like an unspoken challenge. I walked away from the cafe with a heavy heart, my mind a whirl of emotions. I had come looking for answers but found only more questions. Who was the real man behind these personas? How many others had he deceived? Back home, I laid out all the information I had gathered, both from Julian and James. Patterns began to emerge, but so did gaps wide enough to swallow any definitive conclusions I hoped to draw. It was clear I was dealing with someone adept at deception, skilled in the art of digital disguise. But I needed more if I was to uncover the full extent of his deception and protect others from his manipulative games. Resolved to unravel the truth, I decided to delve deeper into the digital world that James inhabited. The cheerful facade of the dating apps now seemed like a veneer hiding darker depths. I created several more profiles, each tailored to match different aspects of his varied personas, hoping to catch him in his own game. One night, as I sifted through potential matches on a lesser-known dating app, I stumbled upon a new profile that bore all the hallmarks of his handiwork. Cryptic quotes, professional-grade photos, and a bio that seemed too good to be true. The name was different again. Now he was Ethan. My pulse quickened as I swiped right, and a match notification popped up instantly. It was almost too easy. The conversation started immediately, and Ethan was more forward this time. His messages were flirtatious, filled with charm and seemingly genuine interest. However, beneath the smooth talk, There was an urgency that hadn't been there before. He was quick to suggest a video call, a direct approach that Julian and James had never taken. Curiosity mixed with a growing sense of dread, I agreed to the call. That night, as I sat in front of my computer, the screen flickered to life and his face appeared. It was the same man, but his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a palpable tension. He forced a smile. "It's so nice to finally see you face to face," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but his eyes darted around nervously. As we talked, I noticed something unsettling in the background of his video. A faint shadow that seemed to move independently of any normal source. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but each time I almost caught a clear glimpse, it shifted away, as if aware of my scrutiny. Feeling emboldened, or perhaps reckless, I decided to confront him. "How many others are you talking to right now, Ethan?" I asked sharply. His face changed then, the charm slipping away to reveal a flash of anger. Or was it fear? "You have no idea what you're playing with," he snapped, his voice low and threatening. Suddenly, the shadow in the background surged forward, becoming more distinct. It was not a trick of the light. It was something else, something dark and formless that loomed behind him, pulsing with an unnatural energy. Ethan seemed to sense it too. He glanced over his shoulder, his face paling. "You need to stop digging," he hissed, turning back to the camera. "You're not safe. None of us are." Before I could respond, he ended the call, leaving me staring at a blank screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The encounter left me shaken. What had I seen? Was it a trick, a sophisticated scare tactic to deter me from delving further into his deceit? Or had I stumbled upon something truly sinister, something that transcended mere digital manipulation? Determined to find answers, I spent the following days researching more deeply into the backgrounds associated with each of his profiles. I contacted other women who had interacted with him, compiling stories and warnings, each more alarming than the last. It became clear that whatever or whoever Ethan really was, he was dangerous, connected to phenomena that defied logical explanation. One late evening, while reviewing the collected data, I received an anonymous email with only a single line. Return to where it started. The sender's address was a jumble of numbers and letters, impossible to trace. The message was cryptic, its meaning unclear. Where had it all started? What did that mean? Confused but intrigued, I scoured through our past conversations, looking for any clue that might hint at what "where it started" could mean. None of the discussions had ever mentioned a specific place that felt significant enough to warrant such a mysterious message. The more I thought about it, the more it nagged at me. There was something I was missing, a detail that had slipped through the cracks of my focused investigation on identities and locations. The need to understand led me to revisit each of Ethan's profile descriptions and conversations from scratch, tracing back to the earliest messages. There, hidden in the mundane exchange of pleasantries, I found a mention of an art exhibition he claimed to have visited, one that coincidentally was in the city where we first matched. Could this be the place he referred to? The beginnings of his deception, where he perhaps truly began his manipulative games under the guise of a cultured art aficionado. Determined to follow this slender thread, I researched the exhibition, which had been a significant event, showcasing experimental artists from around the region. It had taken place at a small, avant-garde gallery known for its unconventional approach and interactive installations, spaces that challenged visitors' perceptions of reality and illusion. With a new sense of direction, I drove to the gallery the next morning. The building was an unassuming structure, tucked away in a less trafficked part of the city, its exterior walls covered in vibrant murals that seemed to pulse with hidden life. Inside, the gallery owner, a middle-aged woman with streaks of silver in her hair, welcomed me. I mentioned the exhibition, noting Ethan's supposed visit, and her expression changed subtly, a look of recognition. Or was it concern? Crossing her features. Yes, that was quite an event, drew quite a crowd, and quite a few. Unusual incidents, she said, her voice dropping to a hush. Intrigued, I pressed her for details. She hesitated, then led me to a back room of the gallery, where remnants of past exhibitions were stored. There was one piece, she began, that caused more than a stir. An interactive display designed by an obscure artist. It was supposed to alter perceptions, make you see things that weren't there, or perhaps were too deeply hidden in your mind. The piece had been removed after several visitors reported disorienting, even disturbing experiences. Ethan had been one of the last to interact with it before it was dismantled, she recalled. He seemed fascinated by it, came back several times until we took it down. After that, things began to happen. People saw shadows, heard voices. We thought it was just psychological, the power of suggestion, but... Her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the air like a wisp of smoke. I thanked her for the information and left the gallery with a new piece of the puzzle slotting into place. Ethan's manipulation had a starting point, and it was here. Influenced perhaps by an art installation designed to blur reality. But how deep did the distortion go, and how had it empowered or changed him? That remained to be seen. Armed with this new insight, I knew my next steps would have to be cautious. The gallery, the art, and its aftereffects on Ethan were the keys to understanding the eerie path he had dragged all of us down. The drive back from the gallery left me deep in thought, piecing together the unsettling connections between Ethan's behavior and the mysterious interactive art piece that seemed to have sparked a change in him. It was clear that whatever he had experienced at the gallery had a profound impact, perhaps altering his perception or deepening his fascination with manipulating reality. I returned to my research with renewed vigor, pulling up information on the artist behind the installation. The artist was a reclusive figure, known only by a pseudonym, and their work often explored the boundaries between perception and reality, using technology and psychology to create immersive experiences. Determined to understand the full scope of the influence this art had on Ethan, I reached out to other attendees of the exhibition who had interacted with the installation. Many were reluctant to talk, their responses tinged with unease. Those willing to share their experiences spoke of intense feelings of disorientation, altered perceptions that lasted days, and a haunting sense that they were being watched. Their descriptions echoed the sensations I had felt during my strange interactions with Ethan, suggesting that the effects of the installation were far more profound and lingering than anyone had realized. One particular account stood out. A woman who described an encounter with Ethan at the gallery. She noticed his intense absorption with the installation, his repeated visits, and his fervent discussions with the artist on the closing day of the exhibition. Her story provided a possible link between Ethan and the artist, a connection that went beyond mere spectatorship. Perhaps Ethan had found a mentor in the artist, someone who encouraged his explorations into the manipulation of reality. Armed with this new information, I sought out the artist, hoping to uncover details of their relationship with Ethan. The task was daunting. The artist's identity was shielded by layers of privacy typically afforded to someone wary of public scrutiny. Persistence led me to an upcoming underground art show rumored to feature some of the artist's new works. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. The night of the show, I ventured into a part of the city marked by abandoned industrial buildings, the venue a stark contrast to the polished galleries of downtown. Inside, the space was dimly lit, the walls lined with provocative art pieces that challenged the onlookers' senses. I circulated among the crowd, listening, observing, until I found myself standing in front of a new interactive piece that bore all the hallmarks of the artist's style. As I interacted with the installation, layers of virtual imagery and sound enveloped me, distorting my perception and pulling me deeper into a constructed reality. It was disconcerting, the way the art seemed to penetrate my mind, leaving me momentarily unsure of what was real. This must have been what Ethan experienced, what had captivated him so completely. After the interaction, I felt a presence beside me. A man whose features were obscured by the shadowy light. "Disorienting, isn't it?" he said, his voice familiar yet indistinct. "It makes you question what you see, what you believe." The voice stirred a memory, and a chill ran through me as I turned to face him. It was Ethan, or rather the man I knew, as Ethan. His appearance had changed slightly, but his presence was unmistakable. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "To see the birth of a new reality," he replied, his eyes reflecting a fervent gleam that I now recognized as obsession. "You've been following my journey, haven't you? Trying to understand?" "Yes," I admitted. "I need to know why. Why the deception, the manipulation?" Ethan's smile was enigmatic. "Because reality is a fabric, woven from our perceptions and beliefs. Once you realize how fragile it is, how easily it can be reshaped, you can never go back to simply accepting the world as it appears." His words hung between us, heavy with implications. The art show around us suddenly felt like a manifestation of his philosophy, a realm where reality was continually morphed and redefined. "I'm creating something," Ethan continued, his voice low. "A culmination of everything I've learned from the artist, from the experiments, and I want you to be part of it, to see beyond the veil, just as I have." The offer was tempting, a part of me eager to delve deeper into the mystery that had consumed my life. Yet, a greater part recoiled, aware of the dangers of losing oneself in the labyrinth of altered realities Ethan inhabited. As the art show dissolved into the late hours of the night, I left with a decision at hand: to follow Ethan into the depths of his new reality, or to turn away and retain my grip on the tangible, unaltered world. The choice was mine, and its weight felt immense as I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the cacophony of the art show behind. The city's lights flickered like distant stars, grounding me in the here and now, yet part of me lingered back in that dimly lit gallery, on the brink of an unseen frontier. The drive home was a blur of conflicting thoughts. Ethan's offer echoed in my mind, a seductive whisper promising answers and revelations, but also a warning of the potential for profound disorientation and loss of self. The art, the manipulations. It wasn't just about altering perceptions, but reshaping reality itself. What if I lost my way? What if I couldn't return from the depths of this new reality Ethan was weaving? Arriving home, I sat in the dark for a long time, contemplating everything. In fact, I spent the next few days in a state of indecision, my daily routines punctuated by moments of intense reflection. I researched more about the psychological impacts of immersive art, about people who had lost themselves in their pursuits of altered realities. Each story served as both a caution and a call to the unknown. Finally, I reached out to a professor of psychology who specialized in perceptual studies, seeking advice without revealing the full extent of my dilemma. He spoke of the thin veneers that separate our conscious awareness from the deeper currents of our psyche, how easily they can be torn. It's fascinating, but also incredibly risky. He cautioned, once you tear down these barriers, you can't simply rebuild them at will. His words solidified my resolve. I knew then that I couldn't follow Ethan any further. The risk of losing myself was too great, the price of the truth too high. I emailed Ethan to decline his offer, my message concise and final. He responded not with anger or persuasion, but a simple acknowledgement that chilled me more than any plea could have. The door remains open. He wrote, should you ever change your mind? Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normality, but the shadow of what I had experienced lingered. Ethan's last message remained in my inbox, a portal waiting just a click away, a reminder of the thin and tenuous line I had walked. Sometimes late at night I find myself staring at that message, wondering what might have been.